evening. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the debate series on corruption. This series selects about 7 very important national issues, mainly arising from initiatives of the government of Guyana, and issues which have generated quite a bit of controversy. And this controversy is largely arising from charges of corruption. We intend to highlight these issues over a series of 7 public debates, with the hope that they will be analyzed and the public duly informed. This is the 4th in the series. In this discussion, we focus the President's pension benefits and claims of corruption. Our intention is to engage and debate every issue regarding this subject, with the aim of separating the facts from propaganda and all the controversies that surround it. I am Al Crichton, and we have this evening to debate this topic a very distinguished panel. And the panel comprises Honorable Anand, I'm very sorry, the Honorable Anil Nandalal, Attorney General representing the government of Guyana. We also have Mr. Charles Ogle, who is our expert on this panel, and he is the Chief Labor Officer. Mr. Nigel Hughes, the Chairman of the Alliance for Change and Attorney at Law. Mr. Carville Duncan, President of the Guyana Labor Union, representing civil society. And Honorable Nanda Gopal, Minister of Labor. We are going to begin, as usual, by asking each member of the panel to begin with an opening statement. In this debate, we ask each participant to be brief and to the point in making their interventions. We have a limited time on the program, and if speakers seem to be exceeding the reasonably allotted time, I'm afraid I will have to curtail their intervention at that point. And even if I do not direct questions directly to any members of the panel, they are free to make a contribution, given the fact that for every question directed to anyone, the other members of the panel will have the opportunity to rebut. And so we will proceed with those in mind. As usual, I need to mention that a Partnership for National Unity is always invited to join the debate. It is public knowledge by now that they have expressed their decision to stay out of the debates. But we always hope that they will change that opinion and rejoin us. They are not with us tonight. We are going to begin by asking the Honorable Attorney General, Mr. Anil Nandlal, to begin by making his opening remarks on behalf of the government.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crichton, and good evening, viewers. Let me say how happy I am to be part of this discussion, and I hope it brings about the results which it is intended to do. The topics which are on today's for discussion today are obviously vital ones, and in particular, the President's pensions and the corruption allegations have been issues which were canvassed in a very focal way during the last elections campaign, and in my humble view and in the view of the government and the People's Progressive Party Civic Administration, a lot of misinformation was disseminated during during that campaign, and that dissemination of misinformation has continued unabated since, and this series is intended to deal with that, to ventilate what the facts are. I wish to say that having examined the legal infrastructure from independence to now, having examined legislations like the Audit Act the Financial Accountability and Management Act, the restructuring of the new parliament, the sectoral committees, having looked at the way that the audit office is now functioning, having looked at the way divestment is being done of public assets, I am confident that at no time in the history of Guyana since independence has there been such a public infrastructure set up in relation to the way public monies are spent and the way public administration is done. At no time in our history has there been the type of infrastructure extant and established that allows for the people of this country to see in a railway and to be informed effectively and efficiently of how government administration is being done. And it is against that context that I think we should proceed with the debate.
All right, thank you very much. Now, having set out those concerns about this on the subject, we usually would like our audience to get a very clear picture of what the issue is about, or what the subject is about. Tonight, we're looking at the President's pension, and we would like our expert on tonight's panel, the Charles Ogle, to tell us exactly what is this, what are the benefits, and give us a clear idea of what the issue is.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good night, viewers. With the pension, there are various industries or organizations, police, the private sector, the public service, have different ways in computing and calculating pension. Since 2003, Act number 10 of 2003, the Constitution Amendment number 2 Act, it is a right pension, there's a right to pension and gratuity. Every person, every worker is entitled to pension. In reference to the Pension Act, before it became a right, the Pensions Act, Chapter 2702, no officer shall have an absolute right to pension for past services or to pension, gratuity, or other allowances under this Act. So since 2003, it has become a right. Each person is entitled. I would even go on to say, as was quoted in the Pension Act, compensation for past services, but since 1997, there is a Termination of Employment and Severance Pay Act, which covers services for either due to redundancy or due to severance, or what people refer to as benefits, compensation. You use different terminology, but the bottom line is severance, services rendered, services work. And it's a legitimate expectation that obviously when you approach pensionable age, or when you've attained the age that is considered pension, be it 55, 60 years, or the age that is agreed on, you expect to receive a pension come that date, come that time. So it's a legitimate expectation. And it is a constitution which is paramount, and which is the supreme law of the land. The Constitution itself declared in Article 8, and everything else again is subordinate to it. Hence, there's the right to pension.
All right, thank you very much. And we now go on to ask Dr. Nanda Gopal, the Honorable Minister of Labour, to make his opening statement.
Thank you, Moderator. Good evening, listeners and viewers. The issue of the President's pension came up, as Attorney General Nandalal pointed out, during the elections campaign, and it's continued with a motion in Parliament by Mr. Greenwich, former Minister of Finance. When the issue was debated, he pointed clearly to the issue that the President's pension ought to be reviewed. President Jacques Deodate's pension ought to be reviewed. And he indicated that it is the view of those on the opposition benches that they will ensure that the pension, the favorable terms which they view arising out of the legislation ought to be looked at and ought to be examined. They indicated clearly that they were going to touch President Jagdeo's pension. And that came not only from Minister Greenidge, former Minister Greenidge, it came from other speakers from the opposition benches. But after it was explained clearly by the Attorney General and myself, in the midst of my presentation, former Minister Greenidge and Mr. Ranjatan, as well as Mr. Bastin Williams, indicated clearly that there was no intention of touching former President Jagdeo's pension. What they wanted to do is to look at the issues to ensure future application. They conceded them in Parliament that they were not and that they cannot touch the pension of President Jagdeo. Now, what we found was that I don't know what their motives were in arguing and in debating the issue, because it was clear in law this issue has to do with the powers of Parliament and what you can do with someone's property. It started with T-Mall case in 1979 with the increment case. T-Mall increment was withheld in 1979. The matter was challenged in the court. Both the High Court and the Court of Appeal found that T-Mall increment could not be touched. The government then, in 1984, moved what you call the Labour Amendment Act. And in effect, that act intended to deprive T-Mall and others from earning their benefits as approved by the courts. And what it sought to do was to take away pension as a right.
Okay, now you will have an opportunity to expand on that, of course, later on in the program.
But if I may continue, the courts found, therefore, that the Parliament could not have enacted that legislation to take away people's rights. And I'll continue with what the Constitution thereafter said about pension.
All right, thank you. We will now ask Mr. Nigel Hughes, Chairman of the AFC, to make his opening remarks.
Good evening. The question of the president or former president's benefits and other facilities have to be taken in the context of what has happened. This president, or the former president, sorry, entered government with no immovable property. He owned no immovable property. He left government with 2 acres of oceanfront property, valued somewhere between $2 and $2.5 million. Before we can discuss the president's benefits and his pension, we have to look at the history. Because we cannot allow people who become the president of this republic to expect the state to maintain their palaces when they leave. In the context of what happened here in Guyana, we had 2 widows, Mrs. Hoyt, who after President Hoyt died, found herself in some difficulty because she wasn't getting appropriate benefits, and before her, Mrs. Burnham. And in 2004, they passed legislation that they thought would address this. Very interestingly, in 2009, they passed the former president's Benefits and Other Facilities Act, which left open-ended benefits for the president. In 2009, the president did not own 2 acres of land, prime real estate in the country. So they passed the act, and the act said that the president was entitled to several things. I'll just list them very briefly, but the most important thing is he was tax exempt, and that he was entitled to services of personal and household staff, including attendance and a garden. After this act is passed, the president sells land that he was allocated in Prattville 1 at an above market price. My learned friend here, the Honorable Attorney General, I think was the attorney with that. $600,000, I think, is the highest price ever paid for residential property, so it's above market price. He then conspires to take away state land because at that location, there was the transmission tower which they moved, and took away part of the Dorcas Club, which is recreational facilities for poor underprivileged people. Conspired then to allocate to himself 2 acres of land, which he acquired at below market prices, $5 million per acre. You can't get a house lot in my part of the woods, which is much lower down the social scale, for under 25 million. Gave himself 2 acres at $5 million each. Proceeded to build a palace, which we've seen. I think the photographs were all over the last election campaign. And then is asking the state to maintain the palace and the palace staff. It is in that context that we have to address the president's pensions that exist. When we come to compare them, I'm sure as you will address later on, nowhere else in the history of this Caribbean, the English-speaking Caribbean, has any head of state taken and acquired state assets, converted it into his own property at below market prices, and then asked the state to maintain the palace. The only place this has ever happened is in Haiti with the Duvaliers. And therefore, in the circumstances when we discuss or begin to discuss this bill and the open-ended benefits, we have to look at it in context. The United States, the benefits are capped. In Jamaica, the benefits are capped. In Trinidad, the benefits are capped.
All right, thank you very much. We now ask the final member of the panel in this opening section of the debate to make his opening remarks. Mr. Carville Duncan, Chairman of the Ghana Labour Union and representative of civil society.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Viewers, as a trade unionist, our position is quite clear. Pension is a right. And pension is something you deserved once you contribute and you have satisfied the requirement to achieve it. And once you accept that philosophy, then one would have to accept that the president's pension is a right. The fringes that come to the pension is another question. But we must understand, as Guyanese, that person who has given their life, their blood, they make sacrifices, and have achieved the age of retirement, they ought to get the benefits that they expected. And it's in that context that we see that we believe that the president pension has no difficulty to us in the civil society. Because we say the same thing for the public servants, we say the same thing for the policeman, we say the same thing for the army officer. And we say the same thing for the laborers. That once you have a scheme that you're entitled to a pension or gratuity, then you ought not to deprive that. Even though in before, as somebody quoted, in way back in 1984, pension was not a right. But from 2003, it became a right. And therefore, and if it is, as I understand, that we use this question of a pension on the campaign trail, and yet we went back to Parliament and said that we don't have a difficulty with the pension per se, we have a difficulty with the fringes that follows, then we ought not to be discussing the question of the president pension. What we ought to be discussing is what we want to discuss is the fringes coming out of the pension.
All right, thank you very much.
But if I may,
we are going to go to a break. We will allow you to come in with your responses to any of the opening statements. And in fact, when we return, we will put on the table basically largely the remarks made by Mr. Hughes and invite responses to what he had said. So, Dr. Gopal, I think you will have your opportunity. I will come to you first after we return from the break.
Good evening, viewers, and welcome to another week at the Feedback Desk as the 7-part debate series continues. We continue to monitor our comments on Facebook and via NCN's email as it relates to the debate. Tonight we have a comment via the email from Brian Azor. He says, as a taxpayer, I have no qualms about putting into law something that was being previously extended at the discretion of the powers that be. I believe that all those who presided over the affairs of this country, whether they be from the government or opposition, should receive their just reward by being able to live comfortable lives after they complete their service to the people. This is the case everywhere around the world, and Guyana is no different. Now, that is all the comments we have for this break. However, when we come back, we'll continue with those comments. Remember to continue to send your views, your comments as it relates to the debate at feedback@ncnguyana.com or on facebook.com/NCN Guyana. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey Carmichael. Now we return to the debate, and here is where we will allow responses to charges and comments made. And we're going to start with Dr. Gopal.
Yeah. I'd like to take issue with what Mr. Hughes pointed out with respect to property. All our politicians and former presidents and presidents own properties and own sizable properties. All our former presidents and the first ladies, former, benefited from every benefit that he read out under that act. In fact, Mrs. Hoyt, Mrs. Janet Jagan, former President Arthur Chung, and then Mrs. Chung, benefited from motor vehicles and drivers, a gardener, payment of utilities bill, including electricity, telephone, and water, payment for security at the residence and provision for security personnel, payment of maids, payment for medical expenditure, payment of an annual vacation allowance for ex-presidents and their spouse, and duty-free concessions for motor vehicles. In addition to that, the tax-free issue of presidents was way back in the days for when Mr. Burnham was president. In fact, when Mr. Burnham was president, the president's salary was higher by 16% than that of the Chancellor of the Judiciary and the Chief Justice. And you can't discuss pension without looking at salaries. The salaries, however, moved, and the Attorney General and the President started to earn at the same level with that of the Chancellor of the Judiciary. If one were to take this issue to the logical conclusion with what existed in the 70s, where the President was earning 16% higher than the Chancellor, in fact, his salary should have been 16% higher. When you look at the 7/8 figure, the 7/8 figure of the salary, as is enshrined in the Act, came about because of what has happened with legislators. It is not only the President that benefits from 7/8. Legislators are benefiting. In fact, the current leader and former leader of the opposition is getting 7/8 pension, 7/8 pension of his salary. There are several members of Parliament who, having served in excess of 12 years, who are benefiting from the opposition side, and as well as all members of Parliament. But the point I want to make is this, Mr. Moderator, that there was no issue when Mrs. Hoyt benefited from pension, half of the pension which the President should have gotten, to the tune in November of 2010 of $543,543. Mrs. Arthur Chung benefited in the tune of Mr. Arthur Chung, $1,085,427. So $1 million, and Mrs. Chung got 542 when he died, $542,714. These things were happening long before President Jaglio. The figures and all the facilities were given from President Hoyt. Mrs. Jagan not only got a president's pension, incidentally, she got also a legislator, because she served as both as a legislator and the president. She got $876,692 per month as ex-president and $137,938 as a legislator. So these things were in the statute books. The only thing that changed, there were 2/3 in the 1970, in the 2703. It changed to 2/3 consistent with those of other legislators. So I want to say clearly that what former President Jagnew is benefiting from is what all the other presidents and the first ladies after they would have departed.
All right.
got.
Thank you.
I just want to
very
make this
much.
clear
Yes,
so that you
Mr.
don't
Hughes.
waste so much of your program time dealing with something that's not an issue. Our issue is not the president's pension. It's the benefits and the facilities. The pension, of course, every president is entitled to have a pension. That's not the issue. The issue is the benefit and the facilities. And where you're going to ask the poor people of Guyana to provide services of provide personal and household staff, where you have erected a palace, and we don't know how many staff members you're going to have. That is really where the issue is. And if you want to discuss corruption, I don't know of any former president, Chung, Burnham, Hoyt, Jagan, who has acquired the assets from the state at below market prices that the former president has. And therefore we can discuss that corruption and the benefits where we now have to go and support that sort of acquisition. So you can't acquire a palace and then ask the poor people of Guyana to pay for your staff in the palace.
Okay. Any?
I would like to come in here at this stage, and I'm happy that the Alliance for Change has clarified that the president's pension is not an issue, because that has been the focal point, that they have made a major issue of this both in the campaign and after the elections, the president's pension. And we are observing now a paradigm shift away from that to deal with two issues Mr. Hughes has identified. One has to do with the facilities and other benefits, and now Mr. Hughes is going into a different area which has nothing to do with pensions and benefits. It has to do with the president's acquisition of his personal properties. So let the debate reflect, let the record
correct my
reflect.
learned friend so he does not misinterpret me. Every president is entitled to a
No,
pension.
that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that there is a
don't need the
concession
Attorney General
that that is not
Mr.
an issue.
Mr.
The
Moderator.
pension is not an issue. Isn't that what he's saying?
I
Well,
don't need the
let him
assistance of the
clarify.
Attorney General, challenged as it is for me to speak English. I don't need his assistance. So I thank him for his kindness, but I believe I can be clear. Every president is entitled to a pension. The issue of whether the pension is extravagant, particularly when you take into account the benefits and facilities that came under the 2009 Act, that is the issue. That is the issue.
Okay.
So the issue is not the pension. That's all I'm saying.
I am not saying the issue. I said
The
if
pension,
is
it
not
was
extravagant.
there. The pension was there, Mr. Moderator, a long time ago. In the 2004 legislation, the pension was indexed at a rate of 7/8 of the current salary of the current president. That is what a former president gets as pension. Now, 7/8, that fraction or that rate was not arrived at whimsically, because that is the rate that all parliamentarians get. That is the rate of pension of most high constitutional office holder, including senior judges of the judiciary, auditor general, etc., etc. So that is in the context of pensions in Guyana, it is a universally accepted rate. Then, of course, pension is a fundamental right under our Constitution. So that is not an issue. What is an issue, according to Mr. Hughes, is two other aspects he has raised. One has to do with the other facilities which come with the pension, and the other has to do with the president's acquisition of assets, which has nothing to do with pension and is wholly unrelated to pensions. Now, I would like to share with this program the benefits to which the leader of the opposition is entitled. Now, the leader of the opposition...
I'm sorry, I really have to... I'm invited here to discuss the president's pension.
Sir,
what the leader of the opposition gets, I'm
sir,
not sure that is
sir,
that of some relevance?
Mr. Hughes is saying that we must look at the president's pension in a broader way, and we must take other factors which are not relevant to this debate about pensions. The fact that the president got property and so on may be the subject of a different debate. We were invited here to speak about pensions.
Are you afraid to discuss corruption?
And no, I'm going to deal with
let's
that.
discuss it. Let's
But I'm
discuss
dealing
that.
with the president's pension in a context of pensions. And we must look at the Leader of the Opposition Benefits and Other Facilities Act, Act number 6 of 2010, and I'll read it for the benefit of your viewers. Section 2. The Leader of the Opposition shall be entitled at government expense to the following. A. Rent-free office accommodation. B. Medical attention including medical treatment or reimbursement of medical expenses incurred by him for himself and the dependent members of his family. C. Full-time security service at his official place of residence and at the office of the Leader of the Opposition to be provided by the Guyana Defense Force. D. The services of a research assistant, an executive assistant, an executive secretary, a clerical and or office assistant, a chauffeur, a personal security officer, a gardener, and 2 domestic servants. E. Salary, vacation allowance, and parliamentary benefits equivalent to those of a cabinet minister. Now, sir, the President's Benefits and Other Facilities Act must be looked at in the context of this legislation also. And these are the facilities to which the Leader of the Opposition is entitled. When one looks at this compared to the benefits that the President gets under the Act passed under 2009, there is massive similarities. And I'll go through them one by one. You heard it.
I can say more
Okay.
than from that.
No,
Nobody, I don't see the link.
All right,
If he wants to change what the Leader of the Opposition has, move a motion.
I am
All right,
saying,
Mr.
sir,
let me-
that we
Mr.
have to
But
take
don't
it
tell
in a
me because
holistic
the Leader of
way.
the Opposition
Let
gets
us,
it.
let us, we will come back to your point about the comparison and so on. I would just like to hear from other members of the panel at this particular point in time on that very issue that that you have raised.
But let me deal with the one. Mr. Hughes made mention about no president had sprawling mansions and took anything. President Jagdew did not take anything at the expense of the state. He paid. President
$5 million
Jagdew,
an acre.
President Jagdew has submitted all his assets, liabilities, and statements of account to the Integrity Commission, which we've never had from the day he held public office to now, and that can be scrutinized publicly if anybody wants to see how he has acquired his wealth. No other leader of the opposition, no other former president ever subscribed to any public documentation. And in fact, when you're talking about taking away state assets, the entire East Bank area before the farm location, I've known of senior ministers of the government, they paid token sums. President Jagdew paid millions for his piece of land. I know of the back of the garden where Mr. Burnham took acres upon acres of land, had animals and everything at the back of the garden,
Belfield.
and was living there. And up to now has a major portion of prime real estate in the name
Just
of
on the ground of
Burnham.
accuracy.
No.
I wonder if I can.
Yeah,
first,
just
on
yeah.
2 points of accuracy. One, if Dr. Gopal can identify to me any acre of oceanfront prime real estate that he can get for $5 million Guyana dollars, I'd appreciate. One, and two, it is the PPPC's government that gave Mrs. Burnham title to that land. She did not have title when the PNC came out of office. She didn't even have a lease. I think she barely had a lease. It is the PPPC's government that gave her title. So when they come in to say they took acres of land, that was formalized, no, not formalized, that was given to her by the PPPC government, and I challenge him on
But
that.
she was living there,
Yeah,
they were
not living.
occupying it.
You're not talking
The fact of
living.
the matter is that they occupied, they took it. The PPPC not only give Mrs. Burnham land, the PPPC give thousands and thousands of Guyanese
You're
land.
changing his
House
formula,
lots,
sir.
house lots at $58,000, starting at $58,000. We benefited Guyanese. And if you were to take the average which the government is selling lots for, and attach it to the price. What do you want, the president to pay more than what every other guy
Sir,
is
no,
paying?
all right,
All
no,
I
I would
was
like
asking for,
to- let me
one
just-
minute, sir. All
I
I
would
would
like-
like you to do is offer me 1 acre of oceanfront prime real estate for $5 million. That's all I'm asking you to do. Give
All right.
me the opportunity to buy an acre of oceanfront property at the rate of $5 million per acre.
All right, no,
Apply-
I would
apply
like
to
to
the
give
Ministry of Housing.
give an opportunity to either Mr. Duncan or Mr. Ogle to make any intervention they wish to make at this point.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
the
Duncan.
question I wish to ask, and I hope that the AFC can answer it, is it the President alone having this ocean-free land? Or is it the President alone has purchased land for that price? Or whether there are other persons there who are living there that purchased land for the same price?
You wish me to respond?
Can I?
I don't know, you asked me a question. It's your program, sir.
Well, you may respond.
This is state land acquired by the government of the day and then distributed to the president and the president's friends at below market prices. Next to Creeder Park, some of the most expensive real estate. I'm still waiting to find out if either Dr. Gopal or my learned friend, the Honorable Attorney General, can tell me where they can get 1 acre of oceanfront property, prime real estate, for $5 million an acre. If they can tell me that, I'd be very, very indebted.
But the fact of the matter is that the price paid for these lots which government are selling, the prices paid are consistent with governmental rates. Gaisuko is selling lots at $4 million per acre. All the lots on the East Bank selling $4 million per acre. Gaisuko sold properties, not only lots. Gaisuko sold properties at several locations based on even the tender procedure to people at lower cost. And I know that.
All right.
It is most unfair to say that the president took it upon himself or took the nation's assets and enriched himself when the entire nation is benefiting from a land policy. And what is wrong with the president getting
contention?
a slightly bigger land?
An acre?
Okay.
It's
All right. Now
slightly
let
larger.
me allow Mr. Duncan to complete his intervention. I had said that we wanted to give Mr. Ogle an
I
opportunity.
should mention there are other Guyanese who got double house lots
Yeah.
at $58,000 for $1 million actually.
Yeah.
I
To
don't know, it's not
allow
about it.
Mr. Ogle to make an
over-
intervention, and then
over
we
half
will
an acre.
allow
Chairman,
Mr.
if I may,
Nandalal.
sir, I haven't completed,
Yes.
because the point I was getting at is to get clarity, merely to say that, but to make the point that it is not the president alone who has purchased that land, but the land was on sale for any person who wanted to purchase. And
Really?
therefore,
Where,
yes,
Including a former regional
yes,
chairman.
I was about to say
No,
that,
where
including
was
a
this
former
land?
regional chairman of Region 10, who had also made a purchase, but unfortunately the check bounced.
But